This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at javascriptjabber.com/KendoUI. Welcome everybody to Views on Vue. Today in our panel, we have Divya Sasidharan.
Hello.
We also have John Papa.
Hello, everybody.
Erik Hanchett. And also Joe Eames.
Hey, everybody.
And my name is Fritz. Today our guest is Duncan Grant. Duncan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a JavaScript developer. I've been working for about, last 10 years or so, kind of focused on web technologies. Probably the first thing I loved in JavaScript was jQuery, the simplicity that brought and the cross-browser compatibility and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of people started with jQuery and really fell in love, feeling powerful.
Yeah, it was just not having to hunt down weird IE issues and that kind of thing. It just made everything so much smoother. And I'm here to talk about 10 things I love about Vue.
Beautiful. And that started out originally as a blog post you wrote, right?
That's right. So I guess I've been doing a kind of personal blog on JavaScript and front-end technologies for about a year. And this was my most successful one earlier in the year. And it kind of went around social media, got some good discussion going. And also I think it was kind of at the cusp of when, Vue was very popular and was taking off, but maybe it was kind of third level down, Angular, React at the top. And I think Vue is very much contender for at least number one spot. Not that it has to be a competitive
I don't do rankings. I'm glad that there's a lot of diversity in the ecosystem because we keep learning from each other. And I think we do make each other better all the time.
We're all special.
But yeah, we have a lot of users and a lot more users than we used to have.
Yeah. I think it's best to call it that everybody is number one, and maybe Vue's 1A, and then another framework might be 1B.
I mean, personally, I don't really think after a certain threshold, I don't even think it matters that much because you need a certain threshold to have a vibrant community, and then after that, it's just more people, and it's still vibrant. So I think all of the major frameworks are at a good place.
I think that's right. And I think, having that popularity is definitely a good thing, having the community to support things. But there's equally lots of good frameworks out there, which sadly I haven't had the time to discover fully, but I know that they seem very interesting to explore. Things like Marco.js. I don't know if you've heard about that one. Mm-hmm. It's made by the team at eBay. And I think the frameworks, similarly, they're all kind of, bounce off of each other and share some of the good ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely learned some things from the other frameworks, continue to, and I know, they've taken some lessons from us in some cases. So yeah, I'm really grateful for those different ecosystems, different mind shares to create new ideas. Because otherwise, if there was just one framework, I think it would just suddenly die one day. There'd be some bloody revolution, with something else, because change would kind of have to be violent.
I probably wouldn't like Vue as much if I was forced to use it, let's say. It's nice having it.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. I think that's true for all the frameworks.
I think too many people get caught up on trying to worry about, am I using the best, latest, awesome, most popular thing out there? Yeah. Not just in JavaScript, but in everything. And I'll tell you a dirty little secret about the container world. Is I was having a conversation with my buddy the other day about containers. And he was telling me, this is basically how the last 2 years went with me and him. He's like, you don't know containers, you need to learn it. Wait, you don't need Docker? Don't learn containers, learn Docker. But don't do Docker like that anymore. Now use Dockerfile. Dockerfile is old, John. Use Docker Compose. John, why are you using Docker Compose? Now you got to use Kubernetes. And I'm like, you just mirrored the exact same discussion every JavaScript developer has gone through over the last 7 years.
Yeah.
With different technologies. So.
Yeah. And a question I get a lot is should I use Vue over X, whatever X happens to be? And the answer is always, for me, do you feel happy and productive using X? And if the answer is yes, no, absolutely. It sounds like you're in a good place. There's no reason to switch.
What if somebody feels happy and productive, but isn't necessarily happy and productive? What would you tell them?
I think their feelings is all that matters. If everybody on the team is comfortable with the progress that they're able to make, then this probably isn't the biggest problem for them. There's probably other problems that they could, put their energy into, like creating more tests or something like that, which is agnostic to any kind of framework.
So I'm just going to throw this out there. If I'm really happy using Scriptaculous, which one is it? What's it called? I forget.
Oh, I don't know.
I have no idea.
John, do you remember? What's the name of this?
Joe, I'm not helping you out with this conversation.
I was trying to find the oldest.
So are you trying to find something that people that you think people should be using?
I'm pretty sure nobody uses it anymore. All right.
Well,
I'm way off on the edge. Let's get back to something actually used.
So Duncan,
going on that thought actually. So I've probably only been using Vue for about a year and a half, and I was happy and content using React, and I still do use React to some extent. And I guess that kind of made me reluctant to even look at Vue. I was just like, oh yeah, another kind of framework out there, kind of suffering JavaScript fatigue a bit. I wasn't really interested to look at it, even though there were some people saying, you should really check out Vue. It's so cool. It does this.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Eventually, though, I did have a look, and it was a comment
on... What was the tipping point for you?
Well, it was actually, I think it was a comment on Hacker News, and it was someone saying that they were saying Vue is like the new jQuery. And I just thought, this is kind of... I know it's nothing like jQuery. jQuery is this old library which is trying to do different things, and Vue's a Vue library, basically, of modern JavaScript. But anyway, just this kind of ridiculous comment had... I don't think it's...
I don't know if it's actually ridiculous. Yeah, go ahead. What greater truth did you see?
Yeah, okay. I guess ridiculous is the wrong word. More very out there comment. I just thought, wow, okay, how is this going to back up? So I kind of went exploring at that and say, okay, what is there to like about Vue? And I found very quickly, especially coming from React world, where many of the same concepts are still reusable, but I just preferred the way it was kind of using existing web technologies. It wasn't trying to do something different. It was it felt like a smaller layer. There's no JSX and things. Well, there is if you want it, but it's kind of use what you want. And I think that kind of essence was similar in jQuery. Use what you want, and it's there if you need it.
So you can just kind of like drop it in and start using it, and you don't have to know everything about it.
Exactly. And Sarah Dresner, she actually did a really good blog post a few months back, and it was about how you can... It was about this, actually, how Vue is similar to jQuery. You can drop it in a web page. You don't have to use your whole app as Vue. You can just pick and choose bits. If you just want a form to be Vue-ified, you can do all that.
Yeah, Sarah's a great communicator.
That was actually a really excellent post that she wrote.
Mm-hmm.
That explained Vue in a very succinct manner.
And we'll try to drop that in the show notes as well.
So I think it'd be fun. I know that we're here to talk about the 10 things you like about Vue, but I think it'd be really fun to ask a totally opposite side of the coin question. What don't you like about Vue?
Yeah.
What don't I like? Oh, that's a good question. It's hard to say, I suppose. I mean,
we don't have to go into it right away. We could circle back around to it, but it is something that I want to talk about today.
Well, I suppose one of the things about Vue is some of the things I don't like about it are what it's not. The kind of lack of Vue, because it provides you only so much, and in many ways, virtual DOM has been done over and over again by all these different libraries. There's not a lot to choose in terms of choosing a virtual DOM implementation, even though obviously it's a very good idea to have virtual DOM for a number of reasons. But those kind of problems are conquered. It's the difficult things like managing state. I mean, Vuex does a good job of that, but some of the complexities of your application are kind of unanswered by Vue. I don't know if that's a bit unfair saying, comparing it to saying that I don't like something about it because it's not there, but
I think that is a good point and a good observation. Like, Vue doesn't have a lot of opinions. It tries to be very versatile, whereas some frameworks like Angular and Ember in particular, makes a lot of assumptions about the kind of app that you're building. And so if you're building that kind of app, it gives you so much more structure to help you do things in a sane way, which can be especially useful for people who want to build really large applications and, have the time to learn how to do it right, but want some guidance. They can't make up their own application architecture.
And neither side of those are good or bad, right? It depends on how you like to roll, I think. If you want, It's funny because I work at Microsoft, and one of the common questions we hear a lot is we want to have a lot of options on how to build something. And then we also hear 5 seconds after that is, I wish you'd stop giving me so many options. Just tell me the right way to do it.
Yeah, it's a balance.
And I think that's the same thing here, is that there's some frameworks. I mean, I kind of agree with you. I think Ember and Angular are more on the side of, here's kind of how we feel like you should build it.
Yeah.
And Vue is more on the side of, you can build it this way, or this way, or that way, or this way, or roll your own.
Yeah.
And there's levels in between. And I don't think any of those are wrong. I just think they appeal to different personalities.
Different personalities and different like team dynamics sometimes. Like if you have a lot of people like leaving and joining the team, and you're kind of defining most of your own application architecture, then you have to manage all of your own internal docs. And if you're using something like Ember or Angular, which have very good docs on like explaining how to organize everything, then instead of having to maintain all of those internal docs, you can outsource that essentially mostly to the people who maintain Angular and Ember, which is an advantage.
Yeah, it's sort of like you have this convention over configuration, and you have these strong beliefs, but they're like loosely held. It depends on where you're coming from. If you like I like working on Angular, like John said, definitely in Ember. Try taking an Angular project and pulling out the Angular library and just putting it in as a script tag somewhere. Like, it's going to be impossible to get running. I've heard of people doing it, but it's very difficult. Yeah. Unlike Vue.
Difficult, I would say, yeah.
Nothing's impossible.
We do that.
Nothing's impossible anymore.
Yeah, and but with Vue, obviously, it's heralded as the progressive framework. You should be able to do that much easier. I'll say one more negative for Vue, just since we're on this negative topic, is that I think that the community is growing bigger and bigger, and a lot of companies are starting to have Vue teams, or either they'll have a few frameworks and one team will work on Vue. It's still, the jobs aren't quite as high. If you look in Indeed.com and just put in San Francisco, you're going to see 100. Comparatively, a lot more React and Angular jobs than Vue. But I think that's changing.
Oh, I think part of that though is like I've known some people who are looking for someone to use Vue, but with their experience using Vue, they don't really feel like they need someone with a lot of Vue experience. They need someone with JavaScript experience, so that really they're looking for a JavaScript developer, ideally with experience using components, whether that's using components with Angular or components with React. Like it doesn't really matter. You can onboard that person pretty quickly because of Vue's fairly gentle learning curve. And because they don't have to learn everything right away in order to get started and be productive. But if they know HTML, JavaScript, CSS.
That's the biggest difference to me is with Vue is it feels to me like I felt when I got into Angular JS 5-6 years ago, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. It feels like, wow, I can get up and running in this thing very quickly. And then I can build on, while there's still as many concepts in Vue as there are in the rest of them, I would argue. Yeah. You don't have to take them on until you're ready. I feel like it's an easier, slow progression to build things as you go. Whereas with Angular, and I'm deeply into Angular as well, I do both these now. With Angular, I feel like you have to bite a little bit more up front now, the newer versions. Yeah. At once. And then once you get past that, I feel like they're about the same. But it's definitely easier to slide into Vue from when I've taught people.
I definitely agree with that. So I've also used Angular and also Angular JS. I've heard many people actually say that Vue is kind of the natural upgrade path. If you were using Angular JS, you'll move to Vue much easier than if you were going to Angular 2 and onwards. And myself, when I was initially learning Angular, I found it very frustrating to begin with because it's like, okay, I'll sit down, I need to learn Angular, and then this RxJS, what's this? This is all tied in. What is that doing? And then TypeScript is being used, and there were kind of all these other related technologies which I felt I had to get my head around at the same time as learning Angular. And I'm kind of happy with Angular now, but the learning curve is definitely steeper in the beginning.
Yeah, and it's not that any of those are bad, right? It's just that it's like, wait, I came into here to learn this, and now you're telling me I have to learn RxJS and TypeScript and observables and reactive patterns.
Yeah, and reactive patterns are really, really powerful. Like I bring like RxJS into a lot of Vue apps, when we need it. And And so I think there is a lot of value in like learning how to think in that reactive paradigm.
Yeah, this is the trick that all these frameworks, platforms, libraries, whatever they all like to call themselves these days, have is how do you make them powerful yet also easy to slide into? And that's a difficult thing to solve.
Yeah, I think of it as like Angular 2+. I think of it a little bit like Vim, where there might be like a lot of new things to learn at first, for some people. But then once you get started, like you can be pretty powerful, and you can configure a lot of things.
The funny thing with all of them is, honestly, is now that they all have a great CLI, React, I'm not talking about all, meaning React, Vue, and Angular. I consider those three to be the biggest and the best, honestly. And there's some other good ones too, but all three of those have an amazing CLI. And if you start at the CLI, I think you'll have a good path with all of them.
Yeah.
I see people occasionally start without the CLIs with them. And that's where I go, try this real quick, because that wall you're running into, the CLI just kind of means you never even see that wall. It steers you right around it,
Mm-hmm. Like you don't actually have to become a Webpack expert if you don't want to.
Yes, thank God.
Yeah. I unfortunately was developing before that was really true for anything.
Me too.
So I've had to become sort of a Webpack expert, and sometimes in my consulting work, I end up doing like Webpack consulting without even meaning to.
Yeah, I was a grunt.
Because that's where the problems are.
Grunt, then Gulp, and that got replaced for a while by System.js. And then was it JPSM? And then there was Webpack. And it's just nice now. The CLIs kind of hide all that complexity for us.
But anyway, about CLI actually is, so yeah, I agree. I've been using kind of the Vue 3 CLI recently. So that's really cool. And it has a lot of interesting technologies you can get up on it. So you can easily use TypeScript as well and that kind of thing. Not that I'm a big TypeScript user myself, but one thing that the CLI does push is going back to the idea of convention over configuration. It does lean it slightly more towards convention at that point. But I mean, the programming and stuff is still very much, easily configurable in Vue. But it's an interesting idea that it's kind of pushing towards that a little bit.
Yeah, we provide out of the box conventions, but it's not a case where, there are things tied together that will break if you start moving stuff around and, if you have strong opinions. And I work with a lot of teams that do have strong opinions. Like there are things that they've been doing that have been working very well for them. Ways that they've been organizing their applications that they want to stick with, so they don't have to like completely learn a new system of organizing things. And I've never had a problem doing that with Vue CLI 3 and getting it to work with whatever they're comfortable with.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm quite new to it myself.
Yeah, and I think Vue CLI 3 also lends itself to adding configuration if you so choose. Because if, for example, you're doing in multiple projects, you're doing the same sort of configuration that Vue CLI doesn't give out of the box, you can maybe create a plugin that allows you to add on to the existing base version of Vue CLI, which gives you that configuration that you can then replicate over multiple projects. So, I mean, in a sense, there is the convention over configuration, but there's also the ability to configure if you so choose.
Yeah, and you can configure your own convention, within the company. Yeah. If you're creating a new project, within that company, you can define that everybody uses this plugin, which sets up the new project the way that you want it to be set up. Mm-hmm. And you did this for, I think, Vuex modules, because you wanted namespace modules, right? Yep.
I did that for Vuex modules because I think Vue CLI out of the box, even if you do manual config, if you want Vuex, it doesn't give you module namespace.
Yeah, not out of the box.
Not out of the box. You have to still configure that yourself. And from most of the projects I've worked on, I always use module namespaces just because I work with multiple components and there's a lot more complexity with the state management. And so I built a plugin, which is actually not very difficult. And it's probably a blog post that I need to finish.
And now you can just use that instead of
exactly
the Vuex plugin that Vue offers.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I use in my projects, which is pretty nice.
Yeah.
Duncan, I'd like to ask you a question about one of the points in your blog post, if you don't mind.
Sure, go for it.
So number 2 in your blog post, which is a great post, by the way, just skimming through it. Single file components. I have my own opinion, but I want to challenge you on something you said. Okay. And see what you think. So in your second paragraph in there, you talk about it has the nice effect, SFCs, single file components, has a nice side effect of encouraging you to keep your code short for each component. I actually agree with you, but I want to challenge you on that. I've been to a lot of places.
Really putting him in the hot seat, John.
Does it really stop people from making small component or big components like 4,000 line ones? What have you seen?
Yeah, it probably doesn't. I haven't personally seen any real horror stories of Vue code, but I'm sure they are out there. And as I say, I guess it encourages you to write something in this way. If you're kind of really not getting the concept that components are kind of nestable, reusable, you don't have to have everything in one big file, then you've kind of missed the point of Vue, I think. And that's a shame, because it's very easy to things start getting big. And at that point, that's the time you think, man, this 500 line file, why this is a mess now. I need to clean this up. And
500 would be nice in some of the places I see. Some of these are like 5,000.
Yeah. I haven't seen, I don't think in the wild, I've seen like a 4,000, 5,000 line Vue component. So that is nice. But I have seen, and to be honest, I've written some big components that, I decided later, it's like, I got to break this out. There was some convenience in keeping it all together, but at a certain point, like things get to a certain level of complexity. And I don't think of it as lines of code. I think of it as like what you feel comfortable and what the other people on the team feel comfortable with. When it starts feeling complex, where it's just like, I can't keep the component in my head at this point, then it's a good idea to break it out, because it's really difficult to develop any file, whether it's a component or not, if you can't just like keep what the file is doing in your head.
And I think we're all getting at is components. We should make components as small as they feel good, right?
Yeah.
That level might be different for everything, but
I think also on a kind of psychological level, developers, people always say developers are lazy, and there's definitely truth to that, because you don't want to keep repeating yourself. You write lots of code every day, and it's a burden. And with single file components, you only have one place to write down all of your code related to a new component. If you say using another framework and you're thinking, okay, I want to write a new component, and let's nest this as a child of this component, you have that burden of thinking, oh, now I have to know the context of that component. I have to create 2 or 3 different files for this component. And it's a very small thing, but I guess psychologically there's a less of a barrier in Vue.
I think, again, I really like this post from what I read so far. I actually agree with all your points, which makes it for a less contentious discussion, unfortunately. We like to have little arguments, right? But
yeah,
create some drama.
I love your points here. And I was reading through these thinking, if I didn't know this article was about Vue, how would I feel if this was for React or Angular, for example? And I think some of these things obviously are very Vue specific, but some aren't. Like even SFC, which are really arguing for, I think they're stating out, is that people like smaller components, and it helps promote that. Easily extensible. I think a lot of those could be there. With Vuex being great, and I agree that it's really awesome. What I think you're really talking about there, and I like your opinion, is managing state on the web is hard, and Vuex makes this much easier than it would be without it by far. Mm-hmm. Is that where you're coming from, or do you feel differently? Or
yeah, I think that's true, because when you start to write anything non-trivial in Vue or React or any of these other frameworks, you quickly realize I can't just pass all my state from the top component down to the child and then go back up there and call some function on the top. It becomes a mess very quickly, and you think there's got to be a better way. And Vuex is really the answer to that and some other problems. The thing I like about Vuex also is it's obviously got Vue in the name. It's very tightly integrated into Vue, whereas something like, I didn't want to pick on different frameworks in my blog post, but I end up inevitably naming some. So I just say, React, there's so many more options which you would go through. I mean, Redux is the main contender there, but Redux to me doesn't quite have the same simplicity that Vuex does. There's many different ways of using Redux. There's lots of different patterns, and I think many people actually misuse Redux as well, or use it when they don't need to. And Dan Abramov, the creator, he's even written a blog article about you might not need to use Redux. His invention, he's saying you don't have to use it necessarily. It's there to solve a certain problem. You can use it in different ways, but Vuex, I think, is a much easier sell with Vue.
Yeah. And a lot of what he says about Redux also applies to Vue. Yeah, people often ask me, when do you need Vuex? And one of the answers that I often give is like, are you currently having frustrations with managing state in your application? No, then you might not need Vuex. Yeah, because it's extra complexity, and it is extra complexity it makes things a little bit more complex up front in order for lower complexity as you scale up. So it is making a trade-off. And if you're not at a point where like things feel complex, then you're just making things complex without getting that benefit.
And something else that is worth considering when you make the decision is also, are you using Vue to its full complexity or like to its full potential? So for example, if you wanted like parent components to pass props essentially down or pass state down to like grand or great grandchildren, you can actually do so using like provide inject maybe instead of using Vuex, because that's possible. And if that's not something that you're using, or if that's a specific use case that you want to fix, you could easily do that using Vue without having to bring in Vuex potentially.
So in some cases, if state is feeling really complicated, the solution might not be Vuex, but rather like using the right tool for the right job.
Exactly, using the right tool and being able to like address what exactly your problem is, rather than assuming that Vuex is the fix-all solution.
Yeah, Vuex will just like fix any problem that you might have. If you don't feel good about your application, try Vuex.
It sounds like a doctor's medical assessment there. Thank you, Chris, very much. 4 to 5 Vue on Vue panelists approve of Vuex.
Vuex may have some side effects.
I do think, and I like the way you worded that a lot too, because it's really a progression, right? I'm staring at you like you can tell who I'm pointing at the screen. I like the way you talked about it because it's like a progression. You think about, I have some kind of state. If all you're managing, and I hear this a lot in the Angular world, all I really need to do is pass the user's profile around. And that's the only state they're managing. Like who's logged in, their name, some other minor information. Do I really need to go with NGRX, which is like the leading one for the Redux or Vuex for Angular? And I'm like, no, you could just create like a simple class that stores that information. And there's dependency injection built into Angular. You just inject the class where you want and share that state and you're done. Because I get a lot of people coming to me saying, I've been told I should never do that ever again in my life. And I should always use NGRX. And I'm like, you need to use the right tool for the right job.
Yeah. And
to that.
The only patterns that I warn people about are the patterns that, like, if the application changes in a certain way, will be really hard to refactor to something else.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that I'm worried about. Like up until that point, like use whatever is going to like keep things pretty flexible so that you can refactor without a lot of pain if you need to, and makes you happy right now.
The only thing I avoid as far as state goes is, and I'll leave out the framework specific terms for it because each of them has one. And instead I'll just say, create a global variable that the page can share that the framework can then access to share the app state around. Those kind of things I think can get you in trouble a lot of just, hey, let's create on window document some state object and shove stuff in there and the whole application gets to that. That one I think is very difficult to keep in sync and keep consistent when it's the source of truth.
Yeah, that's similar to how I think on previous podcasts we've talked about this, where there's an anti-pattern, which is global event buses in Vue, which is the same. It's very difficult to manage because it can get out of hand. And
to be fair, like we've taught people how to do it before because some people have asked how to do it, and then we've realized like no, there isn't actually a situation where like there are other also simple patterns that would probably be better in those cases.
I think the problem is it demos well, right? Sometimes the easiest thing to show is it demos really well, but then when you put them into real apps, those things don't play out so great.
Yeah. So I mean, our goal is to provide options that demo as well, like has all the advantages of an event bus, because they're using an event bus for a reason. Like people who are using an event bus aren't stupid or anything. There are real advantages to that pattern that they're looking for. And so providing a pattern that will give them those same advantages that doesn't have the same disadvantages is what we're aiming for. Yeah. And to be clear and really quick, I just want to say I'd recommend using root state. So using this $root and keeping all of your state on the root rather than using an event bus, because then you still have all of your state in one place, which will be much easier to move over to Vuex if you need to make that migration. And it offers a lot of the same advantages. You can still access your state from any component, but you're not duplicating the same state between components like you would with an event bus oftentimes. So that's all I'll say about that. I just wanted to, instead of, for people who, I've mentioned it before on other podcasts, but for people who are hearing this, like, what's this other pattern, Chris? You're leaving me hanging.
Deploy more, pay less with DigitalOcean, the simplest all-in-one cloud computing platform for developers. Scale and run cloud applications faster and more efficiently with effortless administration tools to robust compute, flexible configurations, networking services, real-time alerts, and rapid provisioning, while enjoying industry-leading price to performance with a flat pricing structure across all global data center regions at any usage volume. Spend more time building better web apps and less time worrying about managing infrastructure with DigitalOcean. Build your next app on DigitalOcean. Get started with a free $100 credit at do/co/views-on-Vue.
So, Duncan, I believe you have also given this as a talk, right?
That's right.
I love about Vue. And some people in the audience had some things that they did not like about Vue that they had experienced. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. So I guess I gave this talk at the Cambridge JavaScript meetup group. So I'm based in Cambridge, UK. And it was interesting doing the talk. So I did the talk after the blog post, but I kind of did it on that format. And I feel like the content worked much better as a blog post than as a talk, because as a talk it felt like I was kind of going through, here's 10 things I love about Vue. Okay, point 1, point 2. It was a bit too list oriented, but at the end anyway, some people had some questions and there was some discussion. One person in particular, they mentioned that they had tried Vue, they'd used it for a whole project, but then they'd run into problems with the reactivity, I believe it was. And they said that these problems, they were sort of bugging the whole app and they couldn't use it. And then they rewrote the whole app after some time. They rewrote the whole app in React, and then they suffered none of these problems again. So it's kind of hard when someone criticizes Vue in that way, because you kind of think, well, okay, maybe you ran into a legitimate problem there, or maybe it was a problem with your own code. By saying that, there's no way for us to tell.
Yeah.
Although it is true that Vue on the whole, the whole reactivity of Vue, which is one of the nice selling points, is you don't have to worry about should component update, did component update, all these things. The state, by changing something in the state, your app kind of magically re-updates. So that's one of the nice things. He said he ran into problems from that. We'll never know.
Yeah, in all of the cases that I've seen where people have talked about a problem with Vue, like not updating when it should or something like that, is them not using Vue.delete and Vue.set in the appropriate circumstances, which we introduce when we talk about arrays and objects and stuff like that. When you're deleting something from an object, like JavaScript currently, at least ES5, doesn't have any way for you to actually detect like when a deletion occurs. So that's a change that we can't track. And so that's why we need methods like Vue.delete to delete something from an object and track that actually deleted. And so there are a couple cases where we can't just magically like read your mind and know when relevant state has changed.
And there's a section in the docs as well that mentions that in I believe in change detection, there's a section on caveats, which is current issues with change detection, which is a result of ES5 JavaScript more than Vue. And of course, in React Next, a lot of those issues will change or
Vue Next.
In Vue Next. Oh shoot, did I say React Next?
Yeah, it's okay.
I meant Vue Next, yes, because this is a Vue podcast. So in Vue Next, a lot of those issues will no longer be issues because we're using proxies, which is an ES6 thing. Yeah. And that will basically, and so if you were to use not use Vue Next, oh my gosh.
Yeah, Vue. Yeah,
Duncan, I come from the same background where I used to do React for a really long time, and then I only started doing Vue like a year ago. And so I'm like sometimes in between two worlds, but yeah. So in Vue Next, they will introduce ES6 proxies, which will basically mean that a lot of the change detection issues will no longer be issues.
Yeah.
That is all.
Yeah, we'll be doing that like under the hood. So people who are using Vue don't have to learn to use proxies.
Vue.set or whatever.
That's the key right there. Do it under the hood so the problem goes away and nobody has to change the way they work, right?
Yeah, so really they'll just be, if people who are using Vue Next, like there'll be parts of the docs that they won't have to read. So
unless they use an older version, in which case they do.
Well, there won't be a next version of the older version.
Oh yeah, that's fair.
Will that be next.old?
Next.old.
Yeah, but there will be feature parity. We can talk about that in more detail at another time because it's a whole big topic that we can go into. But that's a good point, Divya. Thank you for bringing that up.
So Duncan, do you ever get asked when you do that talk about the one thing I hear all the time, and Chris, you and I talked about this when we were on a while ago, Vue isn't good for building large applications. Do you ever hear that one? And how do you respond?
I have heard that one, yes. And I guess I kind of feel like, okay, I admit I've probably only built medium-sized applications myself using Vue. So to some extent, I'm not really the best person to counter-argue that. But I think a lot of the structures it has in place, so I mean, we mentioned the single-file components having nice repercussions on maintainability of code and these kind of things. A lot of these structures seem very scalable in Vue. I imagine with larger projects, you'll have to put more thought into things like Vuex. So if you had all your state in one place, then yeah, that could be complicated to manage. I guess we talked a little bit about the modules of Vuex, so that's one idea to start using those a bit more. But I guess, yeah, large projects are never going to be easy. It doesn't matter what framework you use. They're complicated for a reason.
I was just going to say, for those people, like, you kind of just need to look around a little bit. Like, there are big companies using Vue in popular applications, and like in China, I think it's been estimated that about half the $1+ billion tech companies use Vue in some capacity, including Alibaba in apps that have more users than the United States has people. So if you are worried about like, oh, what if every single person in like North America like became my user or something like that, every single person, like even babies, then like, yeah, Vue has been tested at that scale, so don't worry.
I think this is actually a great topic to do on podcast someday. Just literally focus on what does large scale application mean? How do we define that in different ways? And then what are the top things we look at? Like, minification, time to first byte on the page, the user experience, lazy loading, separation of modules, all the things we think about when we build large scale apps, and look at how does Vue attack each one of those, just to kind of dispel some of these things.
When we were talking about some of the other criticisms that came up from this blog post, point number 10, the last one, I think that probably drew some of the most debate. So it's about, I like Vue for the fact that it's not maintained by a single corporation, not naming any names. But, it feels like the decisions which are made in this steering the development of Vue and the directions there are more kind of community-based. That's my personal opinion. And there have been some cases where Facebook made some decisions which were not clearly in the best interests of the community. For instance, the licensing model, which I brought up in the blog post. So that used to be some kind of strange Facebook license, which no one could truly understand. They have since moved it to MIT, though, so they are forgiven for that. And I guess
I've also seen it stated pretty explicitly in some issues on React that React is primarily for Facebook and incidentally for other people to use. Yeah, and so it's solving problems that Facebook has, which happen to be problems that a lot of other people have as well, which is really nice. And it's really nice that as they're developing it, they have these huge applications to test it against, to make sure that it's going to work for all of the different use cases that they have. So that there are a lot of advantages to that. But yeah, there are some disadvantages too.
Exactly. I guess the flip side to that, though, that some people brought up is they were like, wait a minute, I don't like the kind of insecurity I feel about using Vue, where you've kind of got one leader, you've got Evan, who's done all the code for this, and what if he was to be hit by a bus and then all the development would cease? That was kind of some people's impressions. I don't think it's like that. I think there's many people who have, contribute to the code.
Yeah.
And there's many companies, large companies, as you've mentioned, which are invested in the code. So there's people there who want to keep things going. Hopefully you won't get hit by a bus.
Vue isn't like a completely convoluted mess that no one besides Evan can even decipher. we have had a lot of contributors to a lot of different parts of the code base. And that is something we're constantly working on improving too. So we can have even more contributors. But we're trying to lower the bar as low as possible.
And the idea that, God forbid, Evan got hit by a bus and that Vue would disappear the next minute is kind of silly if you think about it. So, I mean, what people are really getting at there, I think everybody wants stability. When you pick something at a company, you want to know the thing that you're working with is going to stick around long enough for the life cycle of that app to be maintained. And whether it's maintained by Google or Facebook or it's maintained by the community like Vue, I think you're really just looking at, is there a commitment by whoever's maintaining this thing to keep it around for the foreseeable future? Yep. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 10 years or 5 years from that matter. We could all be doing COBOL again in 5 years. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, we have, if it helps these people concerns, like we do have a lot of people contributing to like Vue core and other projects, people on the core team who like have commit access. We wouldn't be able to like no longer push out updates or anything like that. And there are systems in place to have all the things that, like, if Evan got hit by a bus, for example, I guess. I don't know why it's buses people are so worried about.
Yeah, what is it with who takes a bus anymore?
Yeah. Well, if you're on the bus, you're pretty safe. I think it's mostly people who are not on the bus that might get hit by them.
We should all just buy him up.
And actually, I take the bus. So I think a lot of people do take the bus. Maybe it depends on your city.
We'll just get Evan a personal driver, then he won't have to worry about it.
Yeah. but anyway, like we have systems in place so that, anything where like only Evan has access to something, we have fallbacks in place so that other people would be able to go in and get access to those things, sort of dead man switch style. Like in my LastPass password, I have it set up so that like my wife or other people could like gain access to like all of my LastPass stuff if something happened to me, so if I don't like unapprove something within like 7 days, then, they'll get the password. But, so we have systems in place. Nothing bad's going to happen. Don't worry, people.
And I think that's
and Evan is very healthy. Yeah. He's looking great.
He's also mentioned like in multiple talks that he's given about how he wants to dispel that myth that he is the only person who contributes to Vue, because I think
it's just
if anything, he's like, I built he's consciously building a core team and trying to make it such that new contributors or people who are active in the Vue community can contribute back to the actual source code.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even the way that I see Vue is it's not one person's effort, it's like a community effort. And that's the reason why I come back to using Vue over and over again, because I feel like it's a joint, like what Duncan was mentioning, you feel invested in the framework because you're like, everyone equally loves it and equally wants it to grow and succeed. And in that sense, like multiple people are contributing, not just one person. Maybe Evan just created it, but it's not going to continue that way where he's the only person who touches core.
Yep.
I think I just counted 24 core members listed on the Vue org page. So that's bigger than one.
It is quite a bit bigger than one.
And global too. So
should be safe then.
Yes.
Yeah, really.
So if there were any catastrophe that were to happen in North America, I'm pretty sure Vue will be safe.
Or
say the same for other
or Europe or Asia,
exactly.
Australia, even Antarctica.
Antarctica?
Well, we don't have anyone in Antarctica, but if like a meteor hit Antarctica would be okay.
Oh, yeah.
What if the internet goes down? Are you stabilized for that?
If the worldwide internet goes down? So if the worldwide internet goes down, we might not have a market anymore.
No one will.
Yeah. Like we're kind of, it's one of our unstated dependencies.
Requires stable internet connection.
Requires internet for users to access. Yeah.
Port it to CB radio somehow. So keep it going.
We'll work on it though. That's a great concern, John. Thank you for bringing that up. and we'll work on some kind of generator-based, like Morse code situation.
Just print
over Telegram.
Every few weeks, print the entire source code.
Not Telegram the app, Telegram the technology. We'll be wiring code to each other. I
hope I'm retired by then.
Pull request merged.
Hey, Duncan, getting back to your post.
Yeah.
Looking at this again, I think this is great. You talked a lot about some of the questions that people ask you, both online in the comments and then also at the talks you've done. I'm curious, where do you see, when we first started talking before this, you were talking about like what's next for you? Like, what do you see? What are the next topics you're thinking about writing about?
Okay, that's a good question, I guess. One of the things I was kind of looking at a while ago after this blog post was something to do with more kind of the internals of Vue. So I started going through the internals of Vue myself, and I was kind of thinking, okay, I wonder if we can explain, using very modern technology, which is not very browser compatible, things like web components and the kind of template features that they provide, if we can create kind of a very bare bones Vue from scratch. So I was thinking of doing kind of a blog post about that, sort of some baby steps, obviously not as fully featured, but just showing here's, Vue doesn't have to be so scary. This is some of the ways that you can get something similar to work. However, it is a bit more challenging than the one I've written. So the one I've written just kind of, came straight from the heart. So I didn't have to go into lots of technical details. Probably my next one will be a bit more technical focused. So I have had some other blog posts which kind of are better, or kind of picking up SEO. So things like async programming, how that's done, and different node topics. So I've written about things like techniques for reading files, whether that's streaming files or reading them into the file system, and which system should you use. And that one's actually been picking up recently with SEO. So, something simple like that, but on a kind of niche area. Those things tend to be quite good for me to write about, I think, because they don't take an awful long time, but they're useful to people. Which is kind of, I want something to be useful to people, I guess, when I write something.
That's a good goal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard goal. I guess you can't always get there, but.
Well, I think it's good you pointed out, because while that's common sense, I think a lot of times we do things, we speak, we write, we do videos, whatever. And a lot of times we do them because it's interesting to us. Mm-hmm. But if you don't also make it interesting to the audience, then it's not going to go as far. And I think that's what you did exactly in your post here, is your top 10 views on Vue, basically, that you liked. It was interesting to people reading it.
I learned that lesson the hard way, talking to my mom about video games and the things I was excited about. It's like, she's like, I haven't played that game. I don't know. I assume, is that the bad guy? Did you beat him? Are you happy about it? What's the emotionally relevant information?
So Duncan, I'm actually interested in going back to, you mentioned that you were a React developer and you moved to using Vue and you found that transition really easy to make. I'm curious if, as you're learning Vue, were there certain challenges that you personally had in terms of like maybe translating more advanced concepts? Like what were things that you found difficult when you were making that transition?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I guess it's another one that's kind of hard for me to answer, because for me, a lot of things from Vue came so naturally. Having used other frameworks, the skills you've learned in that, React or Angular kind of translates very easily onto Vue. Also, Vue being based on standard technologies, single file component, you just have CSS, HTML, JavaScript. It's all kind of familiar. I guess one small thing that I had to spend a little bit of time on was actually the reactivity. So as we discussed, it's kind of this magic thing under the hood. And Vuex is also kind of using this reactivity. And I do remember one time kind of debugging something a little bit. And what I hadn't done is I hadn't put a variable as null initially in the state. I just thought I can add it there and it will appear. But however, you have to have something, you have to set something as null to begin with so that Vue is made aware of it. And that kind of small detail wasn't very clear to me to begin with.
Yeah, that's interesting. For me, it was when I transitioned from React to Vue, my biggest thing was just understanding patterns that would translate between the two. So like Chris has done a wonderful job in writing the documentation, because it's geared towards
and a lot of other contributors.
And a lot of contributors, of course, in terms of like explaining how Vue works, and like it's really good for ramping up. But a lot of the times, especially if you're super proficient in another framework, you just want to be able to translate quickly, which is like, it's almost that frustration you get when you're learning a new language, like a new foreign language, not JavaScript language. But so like if like I'm learning Spanish, and sometimes it's difficult and frustrating because I'm like, I can actually speak Like I can speak in complicated sentences, but it doesn't translate.
Yeah, in other languages, just not Spanish.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, that was always the frustrating part because I was like, okay, I know how to do render props in React. I have no idea what that is like in Vue, because obviously in Vue, that's not what they're called.
Yeah, how do you solve like a render prop like problem?
Yeah, exactly.
And the answer is
scope slots.
Yeah.
which is actually really interesting because and that ends up happening a lot because when people move from one framework to another, the vocabulary changes. We don't use the same words for things, but the concepts are the same because ultimately it's a front-end framework. We use, essentially the same patterns.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's always the difficulty that I found.
Yeah, and scope slots are a little bit different from render props, which
it's
is why
exactly
we don't use the same language. Because scope slots you can use in templates and in render functions. We've designed it so that they're usable with a nice interface in both scenarios. Whereas render props, which can actually be used in Vue, you can use that with render functions. They can only be used with render functions, though. So they're assuming like parent and child, they're both using render functions.
I think, I agree about the documentation as well being really well written and easy to get to grips with. I actually had kind of a small argument with someone on Reddit about, he was saying the Vue documentation, there's so much more to it than React. And I was kind of saying, no, there's not. It's very easy to pick up. And I think the thing with Vue is you don't have to read all the documentation up front. You can just read a page or two and you've got something to get started with. And then when you encounter the next thing, okay, how do I do this? It's there when you need it.
And we have a section of the guide called the essentials. And the essentials are really like all the essential like concepts that you need to be productive in Vue. So you can read that. And I've talked to a lot of people. We work on making sure that people can get through that, like on a free day, like on a Saturday or something, or if they can get paid to go through Vue, just like taking one day, and at the end of that day, they'll know how to build like serious Vue applications, which is a pretty nice onboarding experience, I think, to like be able to get started and be productive using all the main features that quickly.
Yeah, and I think like you say, it takes a very small amount of time to start using Vue and to form an opinion of it. You don't have to invest multiple days in it necessarily.
Yeah. So, Duncan, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work, more about the articles that you're writing?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess actually my introduction was a bit short to say I work in Cambridge, UK. So as already said, I'm kind of quite active in the meetup group there. On Twitter, I have a Twitter account where I tweet about JavaScript mostly and kind of retweet things that I find interesting or funny related to JavaScript. And my Twitter name is The Web Nomad. So that's probably the best place to, find out where I am and get updates on the next blog post that I write, which will hopefully be in the next month or so. And then my Medium account is where I put my blog articles, and my name on there is Dalai Dunk. So I have these silly names online. And I work in Cambridge for a company called Cambridge Intelligence, and we make visualization software. So it's all browser-based using JavaScript, WebGL and stuff.
Cool.
And I get to use kind of a lot of JavaScript frameworks by working there.
Nice. WebGL can be fun. And if you're writing raw WebGL, frustrating.
Yeah.
For me, at least.
You're writing shaders?
Yeah, I'm writing shaders. Oh, don't get me started.
Yeah, I don't do WebGL really personally much, but I mean, we've got WebGL devs and they've done everything from scratch to font rendering and all that kind of thing. You get nothing given to you for free.
Bless their hearts. Thank goodness for them.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, then let's start wrapping up and moving on to picks. So,
hi, this is Charles Max Wood, and I've been asked more times than I can count, how do I stay current? There's a lot to this question, and I'm working on a solution: code badges. That's right. You heard me right. Basically, the idea is that you come and do a code badge, and that gets you an introduction to a topic. Then you can decide if you want to pursue it further. But while working on the badge, you gain enough proficiency to be able to pick it up again if you need. A lot of technology comes through on the bleeding edge, and not all of it sticks, but the principles do. So doing badges on the technologies that will get you ahead will provide you with experience needed to stay competitive. Plus, it offers social proof that you know something about the topic. The project is on Kickstarter right now. You can support it and get on the launch list at codebadge.org.
I'm going to start, I think, with John, if you are ready with your picks.
Yep, I just had to press the unmute button. So I tend to do picks that are technical and non-technical when I do this. And I think the non-technical pick right now is some books that I've been reading. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I've never read some of the Star Wars books, and I've been actually getting into them lately. Some of them are really, really cool. And I've been doing them on audiobooks. So the pick I'm going to put out there is one on, it's called Ahsoka. It's on name of a Jedi person who basically was a Padawan or the intern in non-Star Wars words to Darth Vader when he was growing up. It's a pretty cool book. It's actually written pretty well.
Intern doesn't sound nearly as cool as Padawan.
No, it really doesn't. I do realize some people don't know what Star Wars is, so that's okay.
I'm just an unpaid intern. I'm just learning to use the Force.
I want that internship right now. The second thing is actually, I've been working with Standard Lib lately, kind of playing around with it, and I think it's really cool. It's STDLIB. I'm a big fan of a lot of these different tools that are out there and these services, like Netlify and Now and Surge and all this stuff. I was checking out Standard Lib, and it's a friend of mine mentioned it and been checking it out. It's pretty cool. Definitely check it out if you're interested in some of these online services.
This is one of those cases where I think I've been pronouncing something wrong. I've always said Standard Lib in my head, and I realized I don't think I've ever talked about this out loud with people.
See, I thought you were going to say it's STD Lib, so that's probably not the right way.
I've been pronouncing it like that. I mean, it could be. Maybe it's pronounced STD Lib. I don't know. We could both be wrong.
I think I say Standard.
Yes, we could.
Most of the time.
Standard Lib?
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll never know.
Yeah.
There's no way to find out. Literally no way to find out.
Yep.
No.
We could reach out to people. We'll get to the bottom of this. Stay tuned for next time.
The episode when we tell you how to pronounce things.
Yeah. So John, were those your picks?
Yes, sir.
All right. Divya, would you like to go next?
Of course. My first pick is an article that Tom Preston Werner wrote called The Git Parable, which I think is wonderful because there's a lot of tutorials and blog posts that talk about how to use Git, and it's usually based on certain commands. So how do you commit, how do you merge, how do you squash, and so on. And the Git Parable kind of walks you through using Git as a story. So it introduces concepts. It's really hard to explain, but you have to read it. It introduces concepts as they come, as the complexity increases. So it's like a story about how there are these two developers who work together, and as they work together, they find different challenges and problems. And there's various Git commands that will solve their problem. But it's written in a way as if you are the developer who is building Git essentially from the ground up.
That's great. I love explanations that tell a story. It makes it so much more interesting. And I think, it makes it easier to engage with.
Completely.
And it gives you analogies.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things that he mentions that I was like, I never thought about it that way. But it makes complete sense, which I think is absolutely wonderful. And is a great introduction for someone who doesn't know Git, or even a reintroduction for people who already know Git or think they know Git.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll have to drop that in the show notes.
So that one's really, really wonderful. And then the second one that I have is, I think it's called 10 Biggest Mistakes with Using CSS Grid. And it's a video that just talks about how misconceptions and just general mistakes that people make using CSS Grid, which is really, really fine, which is really, really funny. And a lot of it hits like the nail, hits the head on the nail, because for example, one of it is you think that CSS Grid will fix everything. Not always the case.
Just like Vuex.
Exactly, just like Vuex. So that's actually a really wonderful video. And then my last pick is probably the same as Chris's, which is Cards Against Humanity, because we are currently recording live. Well, not live.
Not live.
Live for everybody else in this podcast.
The people on the podcast, for the panelists, and for Duncan.
Exactly. But we're recording from the Cards Against Humanity headquarters in Chicago, Illinois.
Yeah, we're actually together, side by side, for the first time.
Exactly. So it's pretty exciting. They have a really, really nice space. We hosted a meetup here yesterday, which was good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you may not notice any difference in audio quality, but for the first time, we were in like a sound booth with a blast door and like these like mics like you've seen on TV, or at least like I've seen on TV, where it's like you pull around, they're like robotic arms that go up to your face, and these like professional headphones and everything like that. Like I feel like a super legit podcaster right now.
Exactly.
And it feels really good. And that's what's important. It feels good to me, and it feels good to Divya.
Oh, completely. Better than being at home with like cats crawling over you.
Well, I mean, that's pretty good too.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
I thought you guys were always this professional.
No.
You're in for a treat, Duncan.
No, I usually start podcasts like apologizing. It's like, I'm sorry, there's a cat, and
yeah,
it looks like
I just fed him. He's lying.
But yes, that is all my picks for today.
Beautiful. And then, one of my picks is Cards Against Humanity too. Thank you very much for hosting us, giving us this like free recording space. It's been really nice. And I also want to give a couple picks. Divya has some things to say about both of these, actually. So these are maybe like joint picks. One of them is coffee that has been eaten by a marmot or some kind of animal.
It's a civet.
Civet?
Yes.
And then the civet poops it out, and it makes the coffee really good.
Yeah, it's actually supposedly the best coffee / most expensive coffee.
Wow.
In the world. So
I have a little sample of this that I'm going to be trying that Divya was able to provide me, and I'll have to report back next time on how good this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then my second pick is also I think this is a historical moment because I think it was Divya's first pick ever. Is that true?
I don't know what you're picking. So
the granola.
It's your granola? Yes, it was my first pick. Yes.
Yeah. So did you have it? I should have tried it before the podcast, but I didn't.
No.
And I still tried the granola too. And it's this granola made by a guy named Rick, which it's Mexican granola by a guy named Rick, but it comes in like a legit package and everything. I imagine like it would be a paper bag when I first heard about it. The first time Divya was on. But it looks super legit. It looks good. I can try that too. I'm going to have to report back next time if I remember.
Yeah. It's a for real thing.
And those are my picks. We'll have to drop some more details about that in the show notes because that may not be very specific. But Duncan, what are your picks?
Yeah, so I guess going on the theme of you went for a coffee thing that you're drinking. For me, one of my picks would have to be kombucha tea. So I don't know if you guys have tried that, but I tried it for the first time. I was recently in America, so last week, and they seem to have kombucha tea everywhere. Maybe it's like the latest craze over there. And we were in a supermarket at one point we were at some kombucha bar, and then the next day we're in a supermarket and they have this kombucha tea. Oh, look, there's kombucha tea in the supermarket. And then we just realized, there's basically like a whole shelf devoted to this stuff. And it's basically like this kind of slightly fizzy fermented tea, which maybe doesn't sound that nice, but it's supposed to be very good for your stomach. And also having the caffeine hit definitely helps as well.
Yeah,
I like kombucha. Yeah, it's great. I didn't realize it was a very American thing. It's good to know.
Yeah, I think it's more popular in America. Like, I'm offered kombucha only in America, probably. Like, probably no other place do people like offer me kombucha.
Well, I guess I've never really heard of it drunk in Asia. So, yeah.
We're slightly behind you guys with trends. So maybe in a year or two, it'll start hitting the shelves over here as well. Yeah.
When you start going to get faucets that have a hot and cold that goes through one stream so that your only choice isn't like water that's too hot and water that's too cold.
We have those. We do have those.
You do have, but like there should be no reason. It's still quite popular to have like the hot faucet and the cold faucet in a sink. Yeah. And all I'm saying, Duncan, is work on it. Talk to your people. Reach out to your representatives and make some change that we can all believe in, because there's no advantage to these old style sinks that just are worse. Well, you have the plumbing technology.
Well, there's no clear advantage, but we've got, we're a funny little country. We've got funny little ways, and maybe there's some reason behind that broader than we can understand.
You are the people.
Maybe there's a reason.
Like, there can't be a broader reason behind what you understand. These are the choices you as a people make. You can't push off responsibility.
It's fearless. Yeah.
This is the answer. This is the answer I've gotten with all of my my UK friends. And it's like, oh, there's probably a reason for it. Or I've also heard some people say like, oh, but it's quite nice. It's traditional. Like.
When I was in America, actually, some people were saying the other thing we're known for apparently is not having dryers in our houses. I thought, really?
Oh, it's all clotheslines.
Yeah, like we hang them. Well, I mean, but the thing is, people do have dryers in their house. It is quite a normal. Although I don't, so I do fall into that trend. I don't have a clothes dryer, and I don't have. In my bathroom, I do have the 2 taps, which is sometimes annoying.
Yeah, I guess that one doesn't feel as weird to me because it's like quite normal.
Yep.
I guess how I grew up too.
Yep. Same.
But I did grow up with modern plumbing. And so that one is a bit of a sore point for me.
I grew up without piped gas. So there was like a gas man who had to come with a canister.
A gas man?
Yeah.
But did you grow up in hot countries?
Yeah. I grew up in Singapore.
I did not grow up in a hot country. I grew up across the pond from you in Belgium.
Oh, right. Okay, cool. Yeah, but I mean, you think in hot countries, fair enough not having a dryer, but somewhere cold like the UK, we kind of need that in the winter.
Oh, definitely. I would imagine.
All right.
But yes, did you have anything else besides kombucha?
Any other picks?
One other thing I'll mention then is so there's this website I've just been coming back to recently. I used to use it a lot in the past, and I've just been getting more interested in it recently, and it's called indiehackers.com. So I guess it's probably fairly well known, but I really like just going on there and reading about founders' stories. So often it's kind of like solo devs, creating some kind of SaaS or some other business, and just telling how they got to where they are. And that's the thing that kind of really attracted me to web development in the first place, is being able to build something that people will use and possibly make a business out of it. So hearing those stories is always really inspirational.
Indie Hackers does Stripe run that? Or are they behind
It was
that?
Yes, I think it was bought by Stripe not too long ago.
Yeah, because I think they run meetups regionally or hackathons regionally where locals can go to and work on their ideas outside of work.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really nice.
Cool.
Then I think that's it today for Views on Vue.
Yep. Enjoy the view.
Bye-bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.